Live in Western Oregon, this is NBC 16 News at 5:30.
I'm not gonna lie, it stings, it's hard to breathe, and I can tell you with 100% honesty, I saw nothing that provoked this response.
Early this morning, federal officers tear-gassed Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler and a crowd of protesters as they stood at the fence surrounding the federal courthouse. He took questions from people for hours. Portland police declared a riot just after 12:30, but did not help with the federal response or make any arrests. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jacqueline Mazer. Commissioner Joanne Hardesty says the first step is getting federal officers out of Portland. She says before federal officers came to the city a week ago, the group Rose City Justice announced downtown daily protests were over. But now, with a heavy federal presence, that's no longer the case. Hardesty is asking Portland police officers to stay away from protests, a request they have been following thus far. She also asks police, if they do respond, not to do so in riot gear.
If I had the police bureau, I'd give an immediate order to say that they would no longer show up at protests, that they would answer 911 calls,
okay,
and they would not show up at protests and with full protective gear, riot gear.
Hardesty also says there needs to be a complete reimagining of what community safety looks like. The U.S. Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security Offices of Inspector General are opening investigations into the presence of federal officers in Portland. This, according to Senators Merkley, Wyden, and Oregon Congressman Emily Blumhauer and Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici. The delegation is demanding federal troops be removed from Portland immediately. They wrote an open letter to Attorney General William Barr and Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf today. They say the uninvited presence of federal agents in Portland is an abuse of power, and there's clear evidence the federal agents are engaging in unconstitutional activities. And with weeks of nonstop protests, the situation in Portland is ever evolving and likely won't slow down anytime soon. Portland protests still garnering national attention tonight. Our Stephanie Rothman is joining us live in the studio now. She spoke with University of Oregon professors about the continued unrest. Now, Stephanie, this is truly history in the making.
It truly is. I mean, the scenes we're seeing in Portland are simply a first for many. It certainly means quite a lot for those in Portland, as they've now become the center of this discussion over civil rights. A UA political professor, political science, and a UA law professor, they both believe this is something we haven't seen yet before.
This use of federal agents on the ground to suppress protests has never taken place in this way before.
University of Oregon political science professor Joe Lowndes says President Trump is using federal officers for performative gain to punish his opponents, the liberal Democratic cities, he says, such as Portland.
The idea of people in camouflaged uniforms with no insignia snatching people off the streets wasn't meant to be done in secret. It was meant to be done in public. This is all for public consumption.
These protests are about, police violence, and that impact of that police violence on racial justice. And so what do we see in response? We see more police violence, like unprecedented police violence.
She says under the law, they are violating First Amendment rights to free speech and the right to assemble. When asked if she believes the presence of federal officers is unconstitutional, Adam Schoen says technically, yes.
Federal officers can certainly do that. But they're going beyond that and extending the scope of what they're doing. And in doing that, they're really trampling on the rights of the states to police their own citizens.
That's why, although them being there is constitutional, the force they're using is not. The reason, she says, is the fact that the detaining of protesters in the city without probable cause and using violence is not tied to protecting federal property, which is the federal courthouse, the only legal right they have to be there. According to the 10th Amendment, the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, or reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people.
It becomes something that this becomes a normal use of DHS or a normal use of U.S. Marshals. This is something that will take a lot of work to disentangle and roll back.
A big concern for many as President Trump deploys federal officers to more cities. Reporting in Eugene, I'm Stephanie Rothman.
And President Trump announced just yesterday that he will send troops to Chicago to quell what he calls unrest there as well. Now, of course, with all this in mind, it's still a very complex issue, something that in fact will be debated about in the courts, as the Oregon Attorney General has filed for emergency restraining orders against these officers. She says, quote, "These actions, if not restrained, will further escalate. They are in fact escalating. Whether or not these actions are stopped by the courts in the near future is something we'll have to see in the coming weeks." Jacqueline.
All right, Stephanie, thanks for that report tonight. Well, a Portland man was shot at Silver Falls State Park North Trailhead parking lot last night. Oregon State Police say 23-year-old Billy Gardner was released from Salem Hospital. OSP says the suspect stole a 2016 Ford Fusion, which belongs to one of Gardner's family members. Now, according to police, the car left the area driving northbound on Highway 214, and you can see on your screen the license plate number, which reads 383MAX. Anyone with information is asked to contact Oregon State Police. Criminal justice reform, a prime issue for Oregon Legislature's special session last month. Meanwhile, the local conversation on police reform in Eugene is just starting. NBC 16's Tom Adams is back tonight with a closer look at what was passed in Salem and how one state senator believes more can be done. Tom.
Well, Jacqueline, 6 bills on police reform were passed by state lawmakers in the June session in Salem, a session prompted in part by nationwide and Oregon protests against police brutality.
State Senator James Manning carries a unique perspective on law enforcement reform. As a person of color and former police officer in Missouri, he says the Oregon legislature took big strides last month with 6 bills passed, one of which makes it easier for Oregon police agencies to discipline officers who commit a crime.
After due process, if the determination is, and decided that termination is what's necessary, that an outside arbitrator can't come in and overturn that policy.
Manning's take on defunding the police? He says it's reallocating some police resources, but more importantly, it's accountability.
Our department, police departments, are not private, separate entities. They are taxpayer funded. And as such, then they are accountable to the people who pay their bills.
It is an honorable profession. We do a lot of good work out there every single day. We remind our officers of what they do.
Springfield Police Chief Richard Lewis says a wholesale dismantling of police departments is not warranted. To the charge by some critics that the police have become over-the-top militarized, Lewis agrees the cops should not be an occupying force.
No one wants that. But on the other hand, and we can be measured about this, but we also have to provide protection for our officers.
Police officers should not look like the military. And, I will argue with anybody against that.
This month, the city of Springfield settled a wrongful death lawsuit in the police shooting death of Stacy Kenny. The settlement pays the family $4.5 million and includes de-escalation training for officers and many other reforms.
In Eugene, people are having conversations about how to go forward in the defund the police debate. And some of that talk will be happening at the Eugene Police Commission.
So I think it comes down to a conversation about what security looks like for our community.
Police Commission Chair Sean Shivers says he only speaks for himself on this story, but he fears if Eugene tilts toward a radical defunding proposal like Seattle city councilors are talking about, then
individuals are going to rely, those who can afford it, are going to increasingly rely on private security and cahoots, both of which have their place, but don't have nearly the level of accountability that we've asked of our police department.
But how soon the local debate will shift from the streets into meeting rooms has yet to be determined.
In a late development, the Eugene City Council has voted to set up a new committee to talk about possible changes to the way the Eugene Police is run and how its money is spent. That group will be made up of police, civilians, and communities of color. Those meetings likely to begin in September. Jacqueline.
Well, the state of Oregon is working on a plan to get students back into the classroom this fall. At a webinar today, the head of the Oregon Department of Education acknowledged just how much of an undertaking it is going to be. So parents, you may start to hear the word cohorting, where a specific group of students and teachers are kept together. Public Health says cohorting could help limit exposure. The director of the Oregon Health Authority says this grouping will have the biggest impact on students. Meanwhile, the state is working to get about 5 million masks from the federal government to distribute them to schools. And a growing group of Oregon parents and teachers is concerned about in-person teaching this fall. They're asking state and school officials, to keep students out of schools until their county has no new COVID-19 cases for 14 days. Some districts, such as 4J Bethel, are offering parents either a hybrid model or a hybrid model of remote and in-person or 100% remote learning. Other districts, like Junction City, are still working to come up with a back-to-school plan. Second grade teacher Tara Cleveland says she hopes students don't come back all at once.
I do not feel comfortable going back, and I know that a lot of teachers are also thinking about their own personal health and safety, but it's more than just that. I'm worried about my students.
She points to students that are low income and may not have access to health care, and those who are often around family members that may be vulnerable to the virus. The Junction City School District says it will release a plan for the new school year by August 15th. Turning to coronavirus cases statewide now, Oregon Health Authority reports 331 new confirmed and presumptive cases. That's more than 15,700 cases across the state. We do have 2 more deaths to report today, raising the state total to 273 now. Multnomah County still has the most cases with more than 3,700. Well, a new homeless shelter is opening in the downtown Eugene area. The daytime shelter is called Recharge and is geared towards helping young people in our community. Our Cassandra Gutierrez joins us live from the United Methodist Church. Now, Cassandra, tell us more about Recharge tonight.
Jacqueline, the shelter here inside our First United Methodist Church is called Recharge and is ran by Youth Era. The CEO of Youth Era tells me they've helped at least 70 people since they've opened their doors, and some of the youngest in the community are helping them give back.
The citizens of Eugene have known for a long time that there is an unserved population, and so it feels like it's about time.
It's been 4 years in the making, and this multi-agency youth homeless shelter could not have come sooner.
Well, I'm a mother myself, and so my kids have a bed and a roof and a home and food and access to services every day that they need, and these youth don't, and it's not okay with me.
She says it has been a privilege to work with the youth and teach her kids at home that this is our community. So far, the daytime shelter has served close to 100 people.
What is unique about this place is that we are low barrier, which means we are trying to have as wide open a door as possible. We connect youth with community resources around case management like birth certificates, IDs, food stamps, health insurance, all that kind of stuff.
Because of coronavirus, of course, there are some regulations such as wearing a mask, getting your temperature checked, and making sure youth don't have any COVID-19 symptoms. While the shelter is helping others, there is one special girl helping the shelter.
The citizens of Eugene step up when they're asked to. A 11-year-old is our biggest donor. She challenged her friends and family to raise over $5,300.
Those funds are going towards opening up a new location, helping pave the path to a better future for homeless youth in our community. Recharge plans to expand their services and has already been talking about an overnight shelter. For now, they are offering services 7 days a week, 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. here on 13th and Olive. For now, reporting in Eugene, I'm Cassandra Gutierrez.
Well, coming up on your only local news at 5:30, coronavirus restrictions continue to hit Lane County tourism. A look at the financial impact, especially in sporting events.